Some packages arrive with noise. This one didn't. It sat there quietly on the counter of the preservation lab brown, wrapping thin cord no return address. But something about the weight of it made me pause. I peeled back the tape, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a wooden box darker than oak, polished to a quiet shine. I opened the lid. A single medal rested on navy velvet, a silver star. Tarnished around the edges, the clasp bent, the ribbon fraying near the pin. It wasn't the worst I'd seen, but the wear told its own story. Not from neglect, but time. Real time. There was a slip of paper tucked beneath the lining. Simple, "Please restore with discretion. Return by hand." Signed only with a name I'd read about, but never met General Nathaniel Royce. I froze. Royce wasn't just a name in military circles. He was a symbol. 4-star general. Retired. Decorated. The kind of man who didn't just serve, but became myth. There were exhibits with his photos at the museum downstairs. He'd led campaigns, delivered speeches, shaken presidents' hands. And now, his medal was on my table. I picked it up carefully with cotton gloves and turned it under the light. There was something deeply human about medals. People assumed they were rewards, trophies. But most of the ones I worked on, especially the ones that came in plain boxes like this, weren't about glory. They were about ghosts. I noted the surface oxidation, the thread damage, the missing clasp hook. I was already building a restoration plan in my head when Ms. Little, the lab director, poked her head in. "Palmer," she said. "He's requested you return it personally. This evening." I blinked. "To General Royce." She nodded. His assistant called. Said to be there by 6. He'll be home. I glanced at the clock, 4:17. That gave me less than 2 hours. Enough time to do a soft clean and prepare the report, not enough for the full restoration. I'd have to explain in person. The drive to the address was quiet. A brownstone in Georgetown, guarded but not ostentatious. The kind of place that says I earned this without needing to shout. The door opened before I could knock. She stood there. Tall, blonde, young, maybe early 30s, wrapped in a deep green cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent. Her makeup was minimal, but perfect. Everything about her felt smooth, practiced, even the way she smiled like she'd been trained in it. "You must be from the lab," she said. Her voice was warm but distant. She didn't introduce herself. "I'm Tess Palmer, here to return General Royce's restoration piece." Her eyes flicked down to the flat case in my hands. Oh, the medal. She stepped aside. "Come in. He's on a call. He'll be down in a moment." The house was quiet, dimly lit, filled with war memorabilia, but nothing overbearing. Just history tastefully displayed. I followed her into a sitting room. Everything in it looked expensive and untouched. She gestured for me to sit. I didn't. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked. "No, thank you," I said. "I won't be long." She smiled again, tilted her head, studied me, maybe too long. "You're not what I pictured." When they said someone from the lab, I imagined she trailed off. Anyway, "I'm Jade." Of course she was. Jade Laurent. I'd seen her name pop up in articles beside Royce's over the past year. Rumors said she was a former gallery curator turned humanitarian. Some kind of ocean conservation initiative. No one really knew. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like I was an exhibit that didn't quite belong. I looked down at the medal case, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not interest, not respect. Something closer to annoyance. Before I could place it, heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. And then, he was there. General Royce. In person. He wore a navy sweater and slacks, simple immaculate. His presence was immediate. He didn't fill the room by volume, but by gravity. You just knew when he was standing near you. "Ms. Palmer," he said, "thank you for coming." His voice was deep, but quieter than I expected. I opened the box and handed it to him. "It hasn't been fully restored yet. Just a soft clean. I wanted you to approve the approach first." He nodded slowly, inspecting the metal with hands that had probably once clenched into fists mid-battle. "You work with care," he said. "That's rare." I felt myself flush. Then I saw Jade again, still at the doorframe, watching us with a strange tightness in her jaw. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I'd learn. Sooner than I wanted to. He thanked me again before sitting down. His hands rested gently on the armrests, but his eyes, gray-blue and still sharp, remained fixed on the metal, like it carried a weight heavier than metal. Jade had drifted behind him now into the background, but not out of sight. She lingered near a sideboard, lined with polished glass decanters, pretending to arrange things. But every so often, she glanced over her shoulder. I stood by, awkwardly waiting for permission to leave. "You said this is only the first pass," he asked, without looking up. "Yes, sir. A full restoration would take 3 more days minimum. I didn't want to polish too deep without knowing your preference for patina retention." He looked up at me and smiled. Not a showy smile. Not the kind you give the press. It was tired, genuine, like someone who'd grown used to being surrounded by people who wanted things from him, and was surprised when someone didn't. Jade's phone buzzed on the console table. A crisp, quick vibration. She didn't rush to it, just let it sit screen up, glowing briefly in the dim room. I don't know why I looked. Maybe I was trying to avoid making eye contact. Maybe I was just tired and my eyes wandered. But I looked, and I saw. The message banner that popped up was short, blunt, no name, just initials EM. Still on track for Saturday. Have him sign the release papers before dessert. Don't forget to smile. Another buzz. Another message followed seconds later. He's so old school. Probably thinks you still care. Jade reached for the phone slowly, like she wasn't in a hurry, like it didn't matter. But there was something off in the way she tilted it slightly away as she read. Her smile when she glanced back toward us was sugar-coated. Empty. And then it hit me. That smile, that exact smile, was the same one she gave me when I arrived. When she offered me a drink. When she said, "You're not what I pictured," the kind of smile that fit whatever mask she needed at the moment. But not the man sitting in that chair. Not the man holding a medal worn by war and time. I swallowed. Hard. My mouth was suddenly dry. He didn't see the message. He didn't even glance her way. He was still focused on the medal, now asking about cleaning agents and thread matching. I answered mechanically, nodding, naming solvents I could barely hear myself pronounce. Jade walked behind the couch phone still in hand. She bent down and kissed the top of his head gently. He reached up to squeeze her hand without looking. It felt intimate, comfortable, familiar, and hollow. I'd seen affection like that before, carefully timed, precisely placed, just enough to sustain trust, without inviting scrutiny. I remember when I was 17, watching my father fall for a woman who called him baby, in front of us, and idiot behind his back. She'd touched him the same way, lightly performative, just enough to keep the lights dim. I wanted to unsee it, wanted to pretend I hadn't read the message, wanted to go back to being the person who preserved old things and didn't interfere with the lives of the powerful. But I couldn't. He stood, thanked me again, and walked with me to the door. I felt the ghost of that smile still on his face. A gentle one. The kind you gave someone who reminded you of the world before everything got complicated. "I hope you'll be the one to finish the work," he said. "I'd be honored," I replied. Jade appeared at his side, hand on his arm. Picture perfect. I nodded at her. She smiled back, but her eyes sharpened when she noticed where mine landed. I knew then. She knew what I'd seen. Her grip on his arm stiffened. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I walked down the steps, feeling like I'd just set something fragile on fire, and yet beneath the guilt, there was a flicker of something else. Not anger, not jealousy. It was a kind of protective instinct, not because I knew him, not even because I respected him, but because for the first time in a long time, I saw a man who had given too much and didn't know he was being taken from again. I reached my car. My hand trembled on the key. I hadn't planned on writing anything, but by the time I got home, there was already a note in my head. Short. No drama, no signature. Just a reminder. Not everything old is worthless. Not every smile is real. And some battles like the ones fought in living rooms don't make it into history books. But they hurt all the same. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the message. Not exactly. It was the way he smiled at her. The way he didn't notice how she tilted her phone, or how fast her eyes moved across the screen calculating. That metal had been cleaned with more care than she showed him. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, the cheap bulb overhead flickering like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay with me or give up. The note started simple. "Sir, I saw something tonight that may concern you." I stared at the words. They looked too stiff, too formal, too easy to dismiss. I crossed them out, started again. This may be none of my business, but I work with history, and what I saw tonight didn't look like the kind worth preserving. Too cryptic. Deleted. I looked at the blank screen, then turned off the laptop. Switched to pen and paper. Something about ink made me feel like I meant it more. And that terrified me. My hands shook. I wasn't scared of her, or even of him. I was scared of what it would cost me to be the kind of person who couldn't look away. My father used to say, "There are two kinds of silence, the one that keeps peace, and the one that keeps rot." He learned that the hard way, when the woman he loved drained his accounts and left a thank you note on the fridge. He never recovered. Not fully. I was 16 when I found him sitting on the porch, holding the ring she never gave back. He looked at me like I could explain the world. I couldn't. But I remember telling myself I would never watch someone I respected fall and say nothing. So I wrote. General Royce. I saw a message on Ms. Laurent's phone while in your home. I wasn't trying to snoop. It lit up on the table. It mentioned signing release papers. Something about Saturday. I don't know what that means to you. But the tone, it wasn't professional. It wasn't respectful. You probably won't believe a word from someone you've only just met. That's okay. I didn't write this to be believed. I wrote it because I've seen what happens when no one says anything. I don't want anything from you. I just needed to say it. I folded the paper, sealed it in a plain envelope, no return address, no name. But then I stared at it for 10 minutes, my heart pounding like it was trying to outrun the decision I'd just made. What if he thought I was trying to interfere? What if Jade saw it first and twisted it into something else? What if I lost my job? I walked to the sink, held the envelope over the open flame of the stove, let it catch. The paper curled, blackened. Smoke twisted upward. It was almost gone, but I pulled it back, just before the fire reached the corner with his name. The bottom edge was singed, ugly now, but real, just like the things I didn't want to see. I pressed the envelope flat again, taped it to a manila folder, tucked it inside the package of restoration notes I'd prepared for his medal. No signature, no flair, just the truth. The next morning I delivered it to the museum courier desk, requested it be added to the outgoing batch returning to General Royce. The girl behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "This yours?" "No," I said. "It belongs to someone who still believes in service." She shrugged, whatever that means. I walked away before she could ask anything else. As I stepped back out into the cold, something tightened in my chest. Not fear, not regret. Something harder to name. The ache of being the first one to see the fire, and not knowing whether you'd be thanked or burned for yelling smoke. I thought I'd feel lighter after sending it. Like I'd done something right, even if it stung. But the truth is, doing the right thing doesn't always come with a drum roll. Sometimes it just comes with silence. Thick, heavy, awkward silence. The kind that starts in the hallway when coworkers stop looking you in the eye. The kind that settles at your usual lunch table, where no one pulls out a chair for you anymore. By Wednesday, I noticed the shift. There were whispers. Not loud, just enough to brush against your ears like static. Enough to know they weren't meant for you, but absolutely about you. I tried to brush it off. People gossip. People speculate. Maybe I'd imagined it. But then the call came. It wasn't Royce. It wasn't Jade. It was Janine from administration. Polite, rehearsed, stiff. "We're re-evaluating contract renewals for independent restorers. You've been a valuable part of the extended team, but due to shifting priorities, your current projects will be reassigned." Just like that. No inquiry, no chance to speak, no explanation. My last check was mailed that Friday, along with a notice to return my keycard. I sat on the floor of my small apartment envelope in hand, wondering how telling the truth turned into unemployment. I didn't cry. I just kept hearing that voice in my head, the one that whispered when I was 10, and saw my cousin steal from Grandma's purse when I was 17, and told a teacher a boy had copied my essay word for word. Nobody likes the girl who tells. I kept thinking about the medal, about the way General Royce's fingers had traced the edges like they were sacred, how careful he'd been with it, and how careless everyone else was being with him. There were moments I regretted it, not because I thought I was wrong, but because I'd been naive enough to think truth had a welcome mat. One morning, I passed Jade at the museum steps. She was walking out, sunglasses on phone in hand, her heel clicks confident as ever. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just smiled, the same smile, only this time she added, "Well played." It wasn't a compliment. I didn't answer, didn't need to. That night, I deleted her from every message chain, cleared every file folder with her name attached. It was petty and late, but it felt necessary. Still, something inside me was unraveling. It wasn't just the job. I'd lost contracts before. It was the quiet. The way people I'd worked beside for years pretended not to notice I was gone. Like decency was contagious, and no one wanted to risk catching it. I applied for other gigs, got polite rejections. A few said I lacked discretion, one even mentioned a pattern of overstepping bounds. Funny. How fast the story changes when you're not there to tell it. Days passed, then a week. Nothing from him. No call, no letter, not even a request to finish the medal. And part of me was glad, because it meant he'd gotten the message. But the bigger part, the foolish human part, wanted to know if it had made a difference. Did he read it? Did he believe it? Did he even finish it before she intercepted? I didn't know. And there's something cruel about silence. It lets your worst thoughts echo louder. I started walking in the evenings, just to breathe, to be somewhere that didn't feel like a verdict. There was one night crisp wind-orange street lamps that I passed a bus stop and saw a little girl holding a toy soldier in one hand, her father's pinky in the other. She was smiling at nothing in particular, just happy. It made me stop, sit on the bench for a long while, and think. Maybe you don't tell the truth because it changes everything. Maybe you tell it because someone should have told it to you once, and didn't. That night, I wrote one more letter to myself. You did the hard thing. You did the right thing. And the silence isn't punishment. It's just the sound of people deciding if they're brave enough to face what you already did. It arrived on a Thursday. No knock. No delivery email. No signature required. Just a plain black box resting on my doormat, like it belonged there. At first, I thought someone made a mistake. Maybe a neighbor's misdelivered package. But when I picked it up, I felt the weight of intention. There was no label, no name, just a seal gold foil crisp and military in its precision. It was his. I closed the door behind me and set the box on the kitchen counter like it might detonate. It didn't. I stood there for a while, just staring, my palms damp, my mind blank. Then with a breath I broke the seal. Inside black velvet lining folded with eerie neatness. A single matte black card sat in the center, heavy, metal, cool to the touch. No name, no number, just a subtle silver crest engraved on its corner, 4 stars. His rank. Underneath the card was a folded sheet of thick stationery, handwritten, pen strokes heavy but elegant. His handwriting, Ms. Rhodes. You were right, and it cost you something to tell me that. Consider this card an apology, not for your truth, but for the silence that followed it. I won't insult your integrity by offering money, but if you're willing to step into a different kind of war room, there's a seat at the table. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. The Windsor. Ask for table 8. Come as you are. I read it twice, then a third time. He didn't mention Jade, didn't mention what happened after, but every line dripped with something I couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, not authority. It felt like curiosity. I flipped the card over. Nothing. Just the sheen of polished silence. I should have said no. I should have taken the card, torn it up, and thrown the whole box in the trash. Because that was the whole point of what I did right. To prove not everyone had a price. But the card burned cold in my hand. It wasn't the money. It was the implication. He saw me. Not as an employee. Not as a nuisance. But as someone whose voice had weight. The Windsor was a private club. Old money. Deeper ties. I'd only seen it once in a photo a donor bragged about. They didn't serve coffee, They served leverage. What did a general want from a civilian restorer who'd barely kept her apartment? I walked to the window, stared down at the street like the concrete could answer me. Cars passed. Lives kept moving. I placed the card back in the box, closed it, and set it on the table. Tried to eat. Couldn't. Tried to work. Failed. Instead, I found myself digging through my closet, brushing dust off a navy dress I hadn't worn in 3 years. I told myself I wasn't going, but I needed to know if I even could. It still fit. Barely. I stood in front of the mirror for the first time in weeks. Pale. Tired. Thinner. But there was something else in my eyes still. Or maybe just the glint of someone who hadn't given up yet. By midnight, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, that box sitting silently at the foot of my bed, like a question I hadn't decided how to answer. But here's the thing about silence. It gets filled, eventually, by choice or by someone else. At 6:42 p.m., the next day, I stood outside the Windsor in the same navy dress, my hair pulled back like I belonged there. I held the card in my hand. Still no name on it. Still no promise. But something in me whispered, "You weren't wrong. You were just early." The Windsor didn't feel like a restaurant. It felt like a cathedral. Dim lighting, deep wood, soft murmurs, and eyes, too many of them watching without seeming to. But the maitre d' didn't blink when I handed him the card. He simply nodded, then led me past the velvet partitions, through a corridor lined with oil portraits of men I'd never meet. Table 8 sat in a secluded corner, beneath an old military painting. He was already there. General Royce. Not in uniform, not giving orders, just sitting, alone, in a dark charcoal suit, hands folded on the table, his posture perfect, but his face tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He rose when I approached. "Ms. Rhodes." He said it like a salute. I nodded. "General." He gestured to the seat. I sat. No small talk. No menus. No waitress. Just silence. And the card between us. He finally broke it. "You came." I did. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. "I read your letter 3 times, he said. Then I had to read it again after she left." Ah, so that was done. I didn't ask what happened. And he didn't offer. But in his eyes there was a void where once sat certainty. "I've served under presidents," he said softly. "Sat in rooms where lives were weighed like currency. But somehow, it took a museum restorer to tell me something no one else had the spine to. I didn't know how to respond. So I didn't." He slid the card closer to me. "I meant what I wrote. This isn't a transaction. It's a gesture. You said what others wouldn't. That has value." I looked down at the card. Its surface caught the low chandelier light, like it was alive. But instead of reaching for it, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. Sealed. Handwritten, just like his had been. I placed it gently on the table and nudged the card back toward him. He frowned. Not insulted, more confused. "What's this?" My answer. He opened it. Read, and for the first time since I'd met him, the 4-star general looked completely unguarded. "Dear General, I appreciate the gesture. I really do. But integrity loses its meaning the second it comes with a reward. I didn't speak up because I wanted anything. I spoke up because if someone had done it for me once, maybe I wouldn't have stayed in the wrong place for so long. Keep your card. But if you ever need someone to tell you the truth again, I won't need an invitation. Tess Rhodes." He folded the letter slowly, reverently, then placed it back in the envelope and tucked it into his coat. When he finally looked at me, something in him had shifted, like a lock clicking open. "I'm not used to being told no," he said quietly. "I'm not used to saying it," I admitted. But this time, it mattered. He let out the faintest chuckle, not mocking, not amused, almost relieved. We sat in silence for a moment, but this time it wasn't tense. It was full. Then he reached into his pocket, not for the card, but for something else. A medal. Not one from the display. This one was old, scuffed, real. "My father's," he said. "Got it when he came back from Korea. Gave it to me the day I enlisted." I nodded, unsure why he was telling me. "I almost buried it with him," he said. "But I kept it. Told myself I'd know when it was time to pass it on." He didn't hand it to me. He just placed it on the table, between us. Not a gift, not a symbol, just a shared space. That's when I realized he didn't bring me here to repay me. He brought me here to see if I was real, and maybe deep down to remember something about himself he thought he'd lost. I didn't take the medal. I didn't need to. I left it there when I stood to go, just like I'd left the card. But as I turned away, I heard his voice lower, softer than I'd ever imagined it could be Tess. I looked back. He wasn't smiling. Not yet. But the look in his eyes, respect, the kind you can't buy. "Dinner. Next week," he said. "No cards, no medals, just 2 civilians." I paused, then gave him the smallest nod, and walked away lighter than I'd felt in months. It wasn't the Windsor this time. It was a quiet tea room on a side street in Arlington. No maitre d' velvet booths, no polished brass chandeliers. Just shelves of mismatched teacups, and a chalkboard menu that looked like it had been written by someone's grandma. He was already there when I arrived again, but this time he wasn't standing. He wasn't postured or performing. He was leaning back in a wooden chair, turning a teaspoon in his palm, like he had no idea what to do with it. He looked up when I entered. Tess. That was it. No Ms. Rhodes. No salute in his voice. Just Tess. I sat across from him. The waitress brought a pot of chamomile. I hadn't ordered it, but somehow it felt right. We poured. We sipped. And for a while we just listened to the gentle hum of conversations around us. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. It wasn't awkward. It was restful. Until I said, "You remind me of my dad." That made his eyebrows lift just slightly. "Oh, not the medals," I said. "He never served. Never even left Indiana, really. But he had this way of carrying silence like it weighed something." He nodded, slowly. What happened to him? I stirred my tea, though it didn't need stirring. "Cancer," I said. "Lung. 2 years ago." He hated hospitals, but he hated missing my gallery show more. So he showed up with a portable oxygen tank and the same ugly flannel he wore every Thanksgiving. I smiled at the memory. He didn't say a word the whole time, just stood in the back, arms crossed, like he was guarding the art. General Royce didn't interrupt. Didn't nod in that fake, polite way people do when they don't know what to say. He just listened. I looked up. He always told me, "Tess people don't need you to sparkle. They need you to stay. That's rarer." The general set his spoon down. "That's a wise man." "He was quiet," I said, "but when he spoke..." "You remembered it." He nodded again. "Sounds familiar." I let the silence sit for a moment longer before I looked at him and asked, "What about yours?" He didn't answer right away. Then slowly he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a photo folded and creased at the edges. He laid it between us on the table. 2 men in uniform, one younger, one older, both unsmiling, both with the same hard jaw and storm-colored eyes. "That's him," he said. "First salute I ever gave. Wasn't even out of high school yet. He looks proud." He was furious, Royce said dryly. Said I should have chosen law or engineering, something with a future. And yet, he shrugged. He pinned my second star. We both stared at the photo. 2 very different fathers, but maybe not that different after all. "I think he would have liked this place," I said. "Your dad? He would have hated the tea," Royce replied. "But he might have liked you." I looked up. That was the first compliment he'd given me that wasn't wrapped in formality or protocol. Just honest, quiet. I smiled. Well, I would have liked him. We finished our tea in peace. No deals, no tension. Just 2 people sitting across from each other listening to the ghosts of people they loved, and in that stillness I realized something. This wasn't a test anymore. This wasn't a game of who owed who what. This was a man who had lived through wars, and a woman who had survived different kinds of battles. Both of us still learning how to sit in peace, to let someone in. When we stood to leave, he didn't offer his arm. But he held the door, and when I passed through, he said something so soft I almost missed it. "You stayed." I looked at him. "I told you," I said. "I'm not here to sparkle." And this time, he smiled. A real one. It was drizzling when we left the tea room. Not enough to open an umbrella, but just enough to make the sidewalks glisten. He walked beside me slow and deliberate, as if each step meant something. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "I didn't expect to stay," I answered. He gave a small nod, like that was a fair trade. When we reached the corner, I stopped. "You said something in there, that my father might have liked you." He raised a brow, amused. "Yes, you might have met him." The rain paused between us. I took a breath. He worked as a military contractor, logistics side, mostly supply chain routes during the 90s. There was this time back in 99 I remember overhearing him on the phone. He came home furious, said he'd clashed with a general, with too many medals and too little patience. "Heyo," said the guy tried to reroute aid trucks through a flood zone because it looked good on paper. Royce blinked once. "My dad refused the order," I said quietly. "He said he wouldn't endanger his drivers, just to make someone's report look neater. He filed a formal protest. Got demoted." Royce was still. Then he let out a breath, not defensive, not surprised. More like recognition. What was his name? Charles Rhodes. He closed his eyes just for a second. "I remember him." "You do." "I was the one who signed his demotion," he said, voice even. I didn't move, didn't speak. Rain whispered on the sidewalk. "I was younger," he went on. "Hungry to rise, efficient to a fault. I saw resistance as insubordination. I didn't listen. I looked at him, trying to gauge the weight behind those words. He was right, wasn't he?" I asked. Royce nodded. The flood hit. 2 bridges collapsed. 3 drivers from the rerouted division died. My throat tightened. "He never told me that part," I whispered. "He wouldn't have," Royce said. "Men like him. They carry failure like bricks. Quiet, unseen, but never forgotten." We stood there in the soft drizzle, bound by the memory of a man who had defied orders not out of pride, but conscience. "And now," I murmured, "his daughter defied you too." That made him smile, but only slightly. "You didn't defy me," he said. "You warned me. There's a difference. Tell that to my former boss." He chuckled, then looked me squarely in the eye. "You remind me of him. Not in appearance, but in spine." I swallowed. There was something warm and strange swelling in my chest. Like grief and pride had shaken hands. "You know," I said, "he never forgave himself for taking that demotion. Not because of the title, but because he thought he failed to protect his people." Royce nodded slowly. He didn't fail. He saved more than he knew. A beat of silence. "I should have written him," he added. "Should have said something." "You just did," I said. "To me." His eyes softened. "And I'm listening." We didn't say anything else for a moment. Just stood there, two people connected, not by blood or duty or romance, but by a man who once stood his ground quietly against power, and left behind a daughter who'd do the same. Finally, Royce reached into his coat and pulled something small from an inner pocket. Not another card, not a key. A pin, silver, with a simple oak leaf etched in the center. "Legion of Honor civilian variant," he said. "They only give it posthumously for acts of quiet courage. It was processed last year. Sat in a drawer." He pressed it into my palm. "For Charles Rhodes." My fingers closed around it. It was cool, heavy, like truth, like justice, late but not lost. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me one nod, then added softly, "You're not what I expected." I smiled. "Neither are you," and somehow, that made us even. I wasn't looking for it. That's what I keep telling myself. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't hoping to be right. I just missed a delivery. That morning I'd gone down to the antique shop to check on a parcel, an old frame I was restoring for a local museum. The clerk, Saul, an old veteran with a limp and a louder laugh, greeted me as usual. "You still seeing that Genaral?" He teased winking like it was high school, and I'd just scored a prom date. "He's not mine," I said, "and technically I never saw him to begin with." Saul laughed. "Well, tell that to the way you look when you talk about him." I waved him off. "I'm here for the box from Missouri." He frowned. "Oh yeah, that one. Weird thing wasn't addressed to you directly. It had your name on the receipt, but was billed to someone named Marina Cole. Ring a bell." My heart stuttered. That name. I didn't know how I knew it, but it didn't feel right. I asked to see the invoice. Sure enough, under sender Marina Cole. Same shipping number I'd given for my order. I took a picture of it and went home, something cold forming in my gut. Once home, I did what any woman with a hunch and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I Googled her. Marina E. Cole. And just like that, the facade began to crack. Not a socialite. Not a nonprofit darling. She'd changed her name 3 times in the last 6 years. One identity linked her to a suspended real estate license in Nevada. Another, to a modeling scam in Florida recruiting girls to invest in their portfolio shoots, then disappearing. But the worst, the third alias, Jade Emerson, a lawsuit, buried in a Veterans Protection Group form, filed by an elderly widower who claimed Jade had befriended him through a military charity auction, dated him for 6 months, then coerced him into transferring a gift of $90,000 to help her launch a PTSD recovery foundation. There was no foundation, just a shuttered P.O. box, and a man who lost both his savings and his dignity. I sat back in my chair, hands trembling, not just because of the woman she'd hurt, but because this was who Royce had invited into his life. a 4-star general, a decorated war strategist, and he'd been outmaneuvered by a con artist in red lipstick. The thought made me sick, and angrier than I expected. I pulled up the message she'd once sent him, the one I'd glimpsed that night at the tea room with the heart emoji at the end. Miss you in that uniform, soldier. Now it felt poisoned. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my jacket and drove. 20 minutes later, I stood outside Royce's residence. No guards, no gates. Just a brass mailbox with his name on it, and the ache of betrayal blooming in my chest. I didn't ring the bell. I just stood there, until the door opened. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. He didn't look surprised to see me. "I know who she is," I said, holding out the printouts. He didn't take them, just stared at my face. "I figured you might." That caught me off guard. "You knew I suspected, but I wanted to be wrong." He stepped aside. "Let me in." I walked into the foyer, the same house I once refused to enter. Now it felt cold. Not intimidating, just hollow. He poured 2 glasses of water, sat, waited. I laid the documents down on the coffee table. "Why didn't you stop her sooner?" He looked down at his hands. "Because when you've worn armor for 30 years, and someone touches you without asking what medals you've earned, it feels like peace." Silence. "And I wanted peace," he added. "I understood more than I wanted to." "But she's a predator," I whispered. "Yes, she targeted people like you." "I know." His eyes lifted steady and unblinking. "That's why I asked you here." I blinked. "What?" "She's not just a mistake from my past," he said. "She's still active. I think she's working on someone new. I can't go through the official route. It would trigger press and political fallout." I stared. "And you want my help?" He nodded once. "I've read your writing. I know how deeply you care about dignity, about honor." I looked at him, hard, then softer, and for the first time, I saw the man, not the uniform, not the general, but a person who'd been fooled and hated himself for it. Maybe I thought this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was about redemption, for both of us. I hadn't worn that black satin dress since the day I lost my job. It had been hanging in my closet like a forgotten promise. But that night, Saturday night, I reached for it again. Not to impress, not to seduce, but to finish something that had been gnawing at my chest since the moment I saw that message on Jade's phone. This time, I wasn't crashing a party. I was walking into a trap, just not the one they thought. The gala was being held at a glass-walled private museum near Jefferson Lake. Spotlights danced across the water. Guests glided through the grand entrance dressed in gowns that probably cost more than my yearly rent. But all I could hear was my father's voice. "Still water runs deep. Don't trust the shimmer." I walked past the valet. The security scanned my invitation, and just like that, I was inside. He stood near the center of the room in his decorated uniform, a wall of calm in a sea of noise. General Royce. He was exactly as I remembered him, straight shoulders, unshakable presence. But his eyes were scanning, quiet, tired, like a man already preparing for the next battle. Then I saw her, Jade, wearing that same red dress. Her arm looped through his like she belonged, like she hadn't once looked at another man with the same smile she gave him now. She didn't notice me. Good. I slipped into the exhibition hall, Royce's private collection displayed for charity. The buzz was all around the rare war memorabilia. Original maps, old compasses, field letters. But one piece caught my eye immediately. The Eisenhower timepiece. Not up for auction. Not even labeled. Just a small plaque underneath "Not for display." It shouldn't have been there. The only two people who knew about that watch's hiding place were Royce and me. Then I spotted her again. Jade, across the room speaking with a man in a navy suit. Not a guest, not a donor. His movements were sharp, purposeful. Not just mingling, scouting. It clicked in that instant. This wasn't about General Royce's heart. It was about his collection. A military-grade heist dressed in lipstick and chiffon. And it was going to happen tonight. I stepped behind a column and texted Royce. "Check the watch. She's not after you. She's after what can't be replaced." No answer. Didn't matter. I turned and walked straight toward him. "Sir," I said, my voice steady, despite the pulse in my throat. "We need to talk." He looked at me as if I were a ghost, but he followed. We stopped near the back hallway, out of earshot from the music and wine-laced laughter. "She's not who she says she is," I said, "and the man she's with. They're planning something tonight. I think it involves your Eisenhower watch. Maybe more." I paused, then looked him in the eye. "I don't care if you never speak to me again, but I care about that collection. I care about what it meant to the men who didn't come home. You can't let them take it." There was a long silence. He didn't blink, didn't interrupt. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. "You turned down the card." I blinked. "What, I sent you the black card because I thought people like you didn't exist anymore. You could have taken the money, but instead you sent back a handwritten note." "I didn't do it to be thanked," I replied. "I know," he said. "That's what shook me." Another pause, and then he asked simply, "Would you help me expose them?" I stared at him. This man, 4-star general strategist, war hero, was asking me for help. Not because I was useful, but because I was honest. "I'm not a soldier," I said softly. "You don't need to be," he replied. That was the moment I realized he didn't just need someone to protect the collection. He needed someone to stand beside him when the masks came off. I knew the dress code before I even stepped through the marble doors. Black tie-high society. Smiles so tight they could slice glass. But I came anyway. Not for the crowd, not for the lights, just to watch a man I once respected pretend not to see me. The gala was being held at the historic Prescott Hall in D.C., a place where chandeliers outnumbered windows, and every step on the carpet made you feel like you owed someone something. I wore a simple navy dress ironed the night before, not glamorous, not flashy, just clean. The kind of dress that made people assume I worked there. And that's exactly what happened. A woman in a beaded gown snapped her fingers as I stepped out of the coat room. "Miss, there's a spill near the piano. Can you handle that?" I blinked. She didn't wait for a response. And then her, Jade. She saw me before I saw her. Walked straight over like we were old friends meeting by accident. She wore a deep emerald gown, hair coiled like a sculpture diamonds, dripping from her ears. And that smile, knife-sharp polished. "Oh," she said just loud enough for nearby heads to turn. "I thought you left the staff entrance." I didn't flinch. I was invited. She tilted her head, mock sympathy in her eyes. "Of course. I'm sure someone mistook you for someone important." The guests near us chuckled politely the way people do when cruelty is disguised as charm. I stood my ground. That's when General Royce appeared. He stepped beside her. Close. Too close. Like a man still believing in the illusion. He looked at me once, then looked away. Didn't say a word. Didn't acknowledge me. Not even a nod. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not all at once. Just a slow, silent splintering. I turned and walked away before anyone could see the heat rise in my cheeks. In the west wing of the hall, I found quiet behind a velvet curtain. The buzz of violins softened the noise of heels and laughter dulled. I breathed. I wasn't angry at Jade. Not really. People like her survived by making others feel invisible. But I was angry at him, at Royce, because silence is a choice. And that night, he chose silence. It wasn't about me. It was about what I represented. I didn't belong to his world of medals honor strategy. I was just the woman who sent him a warning, and then refused his gratitude. And now, I was being erased in real time. That's the thing about being humiliated quietly. It doesn't make headlines, but it stays with you longer than applause. I stepped outside into the courtyard. The air was colder than I expected. Somewhere inside, laughter erupted near the open bar. I watched my breath fog and vanish in the moonlight. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured. Him. He didn't speak for a long while. Just stood beside me like we were both statues in some war memorial garden. I saw everything he said at last. I kept my gaze forward. I couldn't stop her. Not without blowing everything too early. You could have said I wasn't staff. I should have, he said. I failed you. I turned. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He looked ashamed, and that oddly felt worse than anger. I didn't come here to be defended, I said quietly, but I also didn't come here to be dismissed. He nodded once, slowly. After tonight, no more masks, he said, from either of us. I wasn't sure what that meant, but something told me the real war was about to begin, and this time, I wouldn't be the only one fighting in silence. The lights dimmed just as the dessert trays rolled out. I'd returned inside after that strange conversation in the courtyard, uncertain why I still lingered. Maybe I was hoping to feel something vindication, clarity, closure. But mostly, I just felt cold. Even under the chandeliers. Then came the click. That sharp, unmistakable click of a projector switching on. Heads turned. Conversations quieted. The giant screen lowered behind the podium. Royce stepped onto the stage. Not in dress blues, but in a charcoal gray suit. No medals, no epaulets. Just him. Plain, direct, deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice low but commanding, thank you for your presence tonight. You came to support the Veterans Heritage Collection, and tonight I want to share a story behind one of our rarest items. A murmur of polite interest swept the room, but something about his tone. It didn't match the words. He clicked the remote in his hand, and on the screen appeared the first photo, a woman in a tight red dress, crouched beside an elderly man in a wheelchair. Jade. The man's face was blurred, but hers was crystal clear. Smiling, manipulating. Royce continued. This photograph was taken 3 years ago, at a fundraiser in San Diego. The gentleman beside her passed away 2 weeks later. His will was changed just days before his death. The medals he earned in Korea never recovered. Click. A second photo, Jade again, this time in Las Vegas, arm in arm, with another donor, then another each time. The same face, the same dress, the same eyes. A pattern, a method. Click, click, click. Each photo a quiet bomb. I glanced across the room. Jade was frozen flute of champagne in hand, lips parted but no words forming. Her body perfectly still, but her eyes racing, searching for exits, for explanations, for someone to interrupt the storm now crashing over her. No one did. Royce's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She changes her name every year. Jade Erica Elise. But the goal's always the same. Get close, earn trust. Rewrite a will disappear. He set the clicker down. Tonight was to be her final score. The collection was her endgame. Gasps. A few people even stood. One man cursed under his breath. But I watched Jade, watched the mask crumble. She turned to leave heels clicking too fast on marble, but before she reached the exit, 2 plainclothes agents flanked the doorway. Royce never looked her way. He looked at me, from across the room. Not a secret glance, not a stolen one, a deliberate public gaze. Then he stepped down and walked through the silent crowd, straight to me. Without a word, he offered his arm. I didn't take it. Not right away. I didn't want it to be a performance. I didn't want the audience to assume I was a prize in some twisted redemption arc. But when I looked into his face, I saw something real. Not triumph. Not guilt. Just relief. So I took it, and we walked out together. The screen behind us still glowed with the final image, a war medal, silver and clean, cradled in a velvet box. Outside, the night was quieter than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally quiet enough inside to hear it. Royce exhaled his breath, visible in the cold. I should have said something earlier, he murmured. You did. Just not with words. He nodded once. The black card. It was a mistake. I didn't know how to say thank you without turning it into a transaction. And I didn't know how to accept kindness without suspecting a price, I replied. We stood in silence a moment longer. Then I asked, was it your idea? The projector? He smiled just slightly. Yours, actually. You said she played roles. I figured it was time she got cast in one she couldn't control. That made me laugh. And just like that, the fog inside me lifted just a little. It arrived on a Thursday morning. No return label, no note. Just a slim, hand-sanded wooden box resting on the front steps of my new apartment in Alexandria. I almost didn't see it. The mail carrier had tucked it neatly beside a pot of rosemary I'd been meaning to replant. For a full minute, I just stared at it. I hadn't ordered anything. My name was printed in clean block letters. Tess Grant, nothing else. I brought it inside like it was something fragile, which of course it was. The lid creaked softly when I opened it, inside a folded piece of velvet. And on that velvet 2 items, a freshly minted silver star, glinting under the kitchen light, its edges sharper than the one I remembered. And beside it, a simple silver band. Unpolished, understated, almost too plain to matter until I looked closer. Etched inside the ring was one line nearly invisible, unless the light hit just right. No price, just faith. I sat down, slowly, and suddenly the clock rewound. Not in real time, but in memory. Back to that night at the gala, to the soft click of the projector, to the moment Jade vanished, and Royce stood before me offering not answers, not praise, just a kind of wordless recognition. After that, things didn't exactly take off between us. There were letters, a few lunches in loud diners, long silences punctuated by quiet phone calls. He didn't push. I didn't pretend. We were two people learning how to speak without rank or reflex. And somehow, that was enough. Until it wasn't. He deployed again 6 months later. A goodwill tour, that's what the news called it. A handshake and flag operation for the cameras. But I knew better. It was his last mission. His farewell. He called it closing his loop. The night before he left, we sat on a park bench outside Arlington. I remember asking if he believed in second chances. He said he believed in earned ones. "Do you think I've earned one?" I'd asked, not quite joking. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "You earned mine." I traced my finger along the inside of the ring again. No price, just faith. The man who once tried to say thank you with a black card now sent nothing at all. No note, no explanation. Just the medal I once restored, and something he'd never dared offer before. A symbol of choice, not obligation, not guilt, just choice. I didn't call him, not right away. Instead, I slid the ring onto my middle finger. Not the fourth. Not yet. Then I placed the medal back in the box, wrapped it gently in the velvet, and tucked it into the drawer beside the spoons. I didn't want it displayed. Not yet. Some things don't need to be seen to be real. They just need to be held. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just showed up. The base was quieter than I expected. There weren't drills or parades, just the sound of gravel crunching under boots and wind-snapping flags overhead. A row of crepe myrtles lined the outer fence, blooming late into the Virginia fall. One of them had started to shed little pink blossoms, scattered on concrete like soft confetti, after a battle long done. I stood there, hands deep in my coat pockets, heart thudding like I'd walked into a memory I wasn't sure I belonged in. Then I saw him. He didn't notice me at first. He was kneeling by a young recruit, fixing something on the kid's dress uniform sleeve. Rolled too tight or something technical I wouldn't know. The recruit stood stiff as a statue, terrified and proud all at once. Royce looked older, or maybe just softer. I took a step forward, and he looked up. He didn't smile. Not right away. He just looked. Still. Like the moment needed stillness. Then finally, a shift, barely a lift at the corner of his mouth. "Thought you hated bases," he said as I approached. "I hate what they symbolize." "Not always who's inside," I replied. He stood, brushed his hands on his slacks. His left wrist still had that leather band he never took off, worn thin with time. He motioned toward the courtyard behind the main building, and I followed. Neither of us spoke until we reached a low bench beneath an old war memorial. It was empty. Wind carried the faint scent of gun oil and magnolia leaves. He waited until I sat, then joined me just close enough for our shoulders to almost touch. I took off my glove, held out my hand. The silver ring caught the light. "I kept it," I said simply. He looked at it, not at me. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. It wasn't a box this time, just a folded piece of blue cloth. Inside was a chain, and on that chain, strung through like a dog tag, was a key. Simple. Brass. Worn. "I bought the place," he said. The cabin you mentioned once. The one you used to drive by after your shifts. You remembered that I forget appointments. Never people. I didn't ask what the key opened. I knew. He didn't say the words. He didn't kneel. He didn't reach for my hand or draw diagrams of a life together. He just gave me a key to something I once wanted, but thought I'd never deserve. A quiet place. A home. A decision made not in passion, but in presence. Not, will you marry me, but will you choose this with me day by day, without ever needing to be asked? There I looked at him, and for the first time in all the months since this strange story began, since black cards and false girlfriends' medals and missed calls, I understood what love could look like when it wasn't dressed up in flowers or apologies. It could look like this, a man waiting without pressure, a ring not given to bind, but to free, a key offered not as a promise, but an invitation. You know, I whispered you could have just sent me a postcard, and risk saying it wrong, he murmured. I figured silence might do a better job. For once, it did. I slipped the chain over my head, let the key fall against my heart. His hand found mine. No squeeze. Just weight and warmth. It wasn't a wedding anyone would post on social media. No cathedral. No aisle. No string quartet. No white doves or champagne towers. Just a porch. A front yard that sloped down into wild grass. A handful of folding chairs. And the sound of crickets that refused to be silenced for ceremony. I wore a soft linen dress I'd found in a second-hand shop in Asheville. It didn't fit perfectly, but it breathed with me. My hair was pinned the way I used to wear it when I ran late to shift changes fast. Honest, a little uneven. There was no veil, because there was nothing to cover. He wore his uniform, not the full one, not the 4 stars, just the jacket his father once wore, the one with elbow patches and a tiny hole in the cuff right above the wrist. We stood under a sycamore tree that had grown stubborn through a split in the stone fence, and the only thing between us was a silence we'd both earned. I remember gripping his hand not tightly but fully, the way you'd hold something precious, not because it might fall, but because it finally didn't have to. There were maybe 12 people there, a retired nurse from my hospital, his godson still in uniform trying not to cry, the man from the base kitchen who once gave me extra pie, no photographers, no planners, just 2 chairs saved for ghosts. Satiniansist. We didn't say vows. We didn't need to, because the real ones had been spoken on worse days, on porches, in silence, through letters that were never meant to be sent. We didn't need promises, just presence. I didn't think I'd cry, but I did. Not for the love, but for the strange, staggering journey it had taken to arrive at it. I remembered the first day I met him. The velvet case, the gleam of a medal untouched by dust but heavy with time, his back straight, his eyes watchful. I had thought he was someone I could never understand. And maybe I still don't. But now I don't have to, because I'm not trying to fit into his world anymore. I'm building one with him. After the rings were exchanged, simple bands warm from our palms, he leaned in, brushed his lips against my forehead, and whispered, "You were right, you know, about doing the right thing, even when it's not your job." I smiled, eyes full. "I wasn't trying to be right," I said. "I was just trying not to disappear." He kissed me then. No audience needed. Later, after the sun dipped low and the food was cleared, we stayed out on that porch. He took off his jacket. I curled up beside him, barefoot dress, wrinkled completely unbrided. And that was the most beautiful part. I wasn't a bride. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a story he saved. I was just chosen. And for the first time in a long time, I chose back. It wasn't a speech. He said that from the start. "I don't give speeches anymore," he muttered, adjusting his collar behind the curtain. "Too many damn microphones. Too many people who only clap at the end so they can go back to forgetting." I smiled. "Then don't speak to the room. Just talk to the person who changed it." He looked at me, then eyes soft but steady. "That would be you." The gathering was quiet, not military, not formal, just people old, young, limping, laughing gathered under an open sky, sitting on fold-out chairs on government grass. It was a small ceremony, honoring civilian contributions to military integrity. The kind no one live streams, but the kind that still matters. He stepped up to the modest podium, no medal on his chest, no script in hand, just the same voice I'd once only heard in clipped orders, and silences heavy as stone. Now it sounded like gravel softened by rain. "There was a girl once," he began, "who didn't carry a weapon, didn't wear a badge, didn't even finish her last paycheck." Pause. She saw something most people wouldn't call their business, and she said something. He turned slightly, just a glance my way. That might not sound like much in a world built on operations and chain of command, but let me tell you, truth has weight, and sometimes it doesn't roar. Sometimes it knocks quietly, like a note slid under a door. Sometimes it wears scrubs and speaks with hands stained by coffee and ink. He let the silence settle, as if he was letting the truth breathe. Then added, "She didn't expect thanks, didn't want rewards. In fact, the only thing she asked for was to be left alone." His gaze lingered on the crowd for a second, then back down. One breath in, one out. But I couldn't leave her alone. A soft chuckle rippled through the seats. Because when someone stands tall without a uniform, you notice. And when she walks away from wealth with her head held higher than before, you wonder what kind of world it would be if more people did the same. He folded the small card in his hand untouched and set it on the podium. Didn't read from it. I once believed that strength was in rank, in obedience, in calculated silence, a pause. But I was wrong. He turned fully toward me now, not just facing me, speaking to me. Strength is telling the truth when it might cost you everything. Strength is kindness with no audience. Strength is a girl who returned a black card with a handwritten line that read, "Doing what's right is not a transaction." I didn't cry, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it didn't ache anymore. Because sometimes the things that used to hurt become the soil we grow in. And because that day, in that quiet ceremony, I didn't feel like the girl who blew the whistle. I felt like someone seen, heard, known, not for what I said, but for why I said it. He stepped down without fanfare. No applause, just nods. Real ones. He didn't walk back to the seats. He walked to me, hand out, palm up, eyes warm. And in that moment I realized he hadn't given that speech for them. He'd given it for me, a voice that didn't need to raise itself, because the right people were already listening. And as our hands met, I knew this wasn't about medals or ceremonies or even love. It was about finally becoming the kind of person my father once told me to be, someone who doesn't look away,